Today I'm sharing with you 4 dresses, woven fabrics, the most classic style that suits everyone, the ever-loved sheath dress. Look at this beautiful print right here at the bottom. So lovely. Hi sewing friends, I'm Karina from liftingpinsandneedles.com. Welcome to this channel that is all about sewing, limitless sewing, and I have some dresses to share today. Let's say that this episode has been years in the making because I started making these dresses in 2022 in September-ish. So it's been a while. It's because these are dresses I have made for my mum. It's taken me a while to make them. They're actually all exactly the same. They're just in different types of fabrics, and they're the most classic style. It's a sheath dress. The sheath dress, really well fitting with short sleeves. They are all fully lined. And it's really hard for me to find a pattern for such a classic style like this. I have seen a few, but back then in 2022, I took the time to fit a bodice to my mom, to do the fitting and do all those things. And then from this well-fitting bodice, all I did was take out the A-line skirt that came with it and just added on a straight skirt, but right onto the bodice, so there's no waist seam there. This is really easy to do, and I'm going to give you some really easy guidelines if you would like to do this. Otherwise, you can keep the A-line skirt if you want to. Now, what I'm talking about here is the lyric dress from Love Notions. The lyric dress and peplum are today's Feature Friday pattern. That means it's only $5. You know, it's over 60% off. Really great value, so much you can do with the pattern. And if you type my code at the checkout, you get a 10% off on top of the sale price. At this point, my code is 10lifting. But this code is changing every 3 months, so don't always get stuck with one code. You need to always look in the description box or right at the top of the comment section. I always pin it there. I pin my affiliate link and my code so you always know what is the current one. If you end up buying a pattern using my affiliate link, you click there, it takes you there, you purchase. You don't pay anything extra. The only thing that happens is that is tracked and I get a commission back for each of these sales. It's one way that I make an income making these helpful videos on YouTube. So if you do use it, I'm really, really grateful. This is a dress I've made countless amounts of times. It's a really nice dress. It's a real classic style. I think you could always wear a dress like this. And it can look so different with, you know, your choice of fabrics, and there's so many different options in this dress as well. And I have been absolutely loving this pattern since it was released in 2019. I've made some for myself. I've made some for my mum. It can be a peplum, different lengths, different sleeves, so many things you can do with the pattern. I've also taken this A-line skirt and just made it a standalone skirt and added a waistband on there. I made some cut on the bias, some cut normal. It's just been a dress I've really, really enjoyed. So knowing that this has many features that could help you with fitting, like lots of bust studs and waist studs, you can get a really well-fitting piece there if you just take the time to fit it. A couple of years ago in 2021, I showed you my updated fitting process. If you want to see more in depth about how I fit a bodice, how I take measurements from the body and translate them onto the paper pattern, maybe shift those little dots around and all of that, this is how that thumbnail looks. It's really in depth and it'll really help you take a bodice like this and work on it and get a really good fit. Exactly the same thing I did with my mom in 2022. Now she uses a size 12 with a D cup size. There are A, B, C and D cup sizes available in this dress. So she has a larger cup size than me, sewing cup size. And over the years, I've made 4 amazing sheath dresses. Changes I've made to the lyric to make this possible. The lyric has a V neckline, but it's crossed over here with a button placket down the center. So if you want to cut that front on the fold, it's really easy. This pattern has a separate pattern piece that is the interfacing. So this is what you would cut out of the interfacing to fuse onto there. And on this pattern piece is that the buttons are marked, as you can see. So I had to do an extra step and just overlay this there, and that's how I had to transfer those button markings onto here, onto the bodice itself, because that's where I need them to be in order to determine that that is the center of the bodice, and then fold away there, and then that would be the center of my bodice that I would place on the fold on fabric. And then you just end up with the bodice on the fold on the front. If you have the bodice on the fold in the front and you don't have those buttons anymore, you need a way to get into this dress, right? Because now we don't have the buttons here. So what I do is just take the back bodice that's originally on the fold and I just add seam allowance so that I could add a zipper. Because the lyric dress is a fitted dress, it's got darts everywhere, I can't just slip that over the head. So the back, that is where the modification will be, very slight. This is supposed to be on the fold. So that fold line there, I would place it on fabric and then add there. Add seam allowance so that a center back zipper could be installed. When I add a zipper, I like to leave 3/4 of an inch of seam allowance there in the center back. So that's something easy to do. Now these necklines and armholes, if you're doing it sleeveless, are finished with bindings. I also have a video showing you entirely how to create this in the original way with a peplum. I'll leave that thumbnail here for you to see all the sewing construction of the original lyric. But because I want this dress fully lined, I'm going to create facings on the inside instead. I do those from the original pattern pieces and then just cut out pieces and add seam allowance to create the lining pieces. So let's see a little bit about the facings and the lining piece. Super, super easy to create. This is my front neckline. The red line on the outside is the one you're seeing that I'm going to use to draw my facing. So from the edge here, I measured 6 centimeters. That's 2 3/8. And that's what I use to make a separate pattern piece like this for my facing. I like cutting out my facings not on the fold, so I replicate it onto the other side, and so I can have an extended piece I can cut directly without putting fold on the fabric. It makes it more accurate like that. So that is my facing. To cut my lining, if you just follow the simple instruction, it's going to be super easy for you. From here, I measure 3/4 of an inch, which in essence is 3/8 of an inch times 2. In metric, this is 2 centimeters in, which means it's 1 centimeter times 2. And this is the seam allowance I'm going to use to sew the facing to the lining. And then I end up sewing these together. I'm going to use up 3/8 of an inch seam allowance from here and from there. And then everything's going to turn out exactly the same as the original piece. So instead of cutting out a facing, cutting it out, adding 3/8 to that one, then adding 3/8 to that one, I'm just already factoring that into this calculation here. So the outer edge for my facing at 2 3/8. The inner line is to cut the lining, and that is 3/4 of an inch on the inner edge. So this is my cut line for the lining. Now you see I haven't destroyed my pattern piece. That's because I've used the tracing wheel on paper to mark this neckline. So over here you might see where the tracing wheel has been used. It leaves you the little holes. So when I cut on fabric, I put my fabric under there, I put my tracing paper under there, and then I go and mark this. Then I remove it, and then I have my cut line for my lining there. And that's why my pattern piece is intact. And this is for the back. Now the back has to have 3/4 of an inch extra here for the seam allowance for the zipper. I haven't added that onto my pattern piece. I leave that there when I'm cutting the piece. That's how it's easier for me. If it's easier for you to make a whole new piece and add the seam allowance for the zipper, then do that, but I don't do that. This is my back facing right there. It's got the same shape along the red line, same distance as the front, 2 3/8 or 6 centimeters there. The inner line is going to be for the lining, and that's 2 centimeters or 3/4 of an inch in like that. And that's going to be the cut line for my lining fabric. When you put them together, it's going to be perfect. Now I know I had to add 3/4 of an inch here for the zipper, so I have added that. You can see the line there. So I already have that seam allowance on the facing, but I don't have it on the main piece. I have to remember to just leave the 3/4 of an inch here all along the center back. Once you sew the facing pieces to the lining pieces, you're going to end up with identical pieces for your main and your lining. So they should be identical. The fact that you cut out a little bit and added seam allowance won't affect the fit, the look, nothing. It'll be identical to the main piece. That's how a lining should be, and the facing should always be interfaced. Now I mentioned that the lyric has a bodice seam all the way around. If you figure out where that bodice hits at the waist, it's really easy to then add some paper and add on a skirt. It could be a straight skirt or a pencil skirt. You know, you're going to get in through a zipper at the back. That zipper is going to go way lower than your waist area. It's going to go down towards your full hip so you can really get in and out easily. And just let me show you easily how you could do that. There are only 2 measurements you need. You need to know your hip circumference. I like to add 2 inches to that for ease, you know, in your total circumference there for the dress. And then you need to know the distance between your waist and the fullest part of your hip. Don't mind the pajama pants, it's cold. So if my waist height is here and my full hip is right there, that distance on the side, how much is that distance? Typically it's around 8 inches, 10 inches for some people that have most of their hip volume towards the upper thigh. So just find the widest part there, whether it's a little bit lower or around the full part of your bottom, 8 to 10 inches. Those are the only measurements you actually need to create a skirt from this bodice to go all the way down and to just end up with one long dress, no waist seam right there. I'm going to show you how I added the skirt on the back piece first. This is the back bodice from the Lyric, unchanged, with the fitting of course and all of that. You can see there's a waist dart right there. Here I drew in the seam allowance. On the original Lyric you would have an A-line skirt attached to here. So you're still going to have the same seam allowance, which is 3/8, and I've marked it right here. So this is my bodice. Over here I have my pencil skirt. This is totally different to drafting a pencil skirt that's going to be a standalone skirt with a waistband. What you need to match is this length right here. That has to match there. And I've also drawn seam allowance here, 3/8 as well. So I'm just going to overlap the seam lines, put this line on top of that line and just put them right on top of each other like this. And this is how I'm going to have a skirt on here, but I'm not going to have a seam when I actually sew it. I'm just extending this bodice into a dress like this. I know that this waist dart here on the bodice fits, so all I did here was just extend it down. You can see 2 lines here, and that's because I was playing with the placement when I tried it on her. The red line is the actual one I used. The green one was the one I just drew before doing the test garment. So it's just like replicating this dart going down like that. So the widest part is here. This is where the waist is, the waist height. So that's the largest part of the dart. You need a vertical measurement, that is the distance from your waist to your full hip, what that length is. For some people it's shorter, for some people it's longer. My mom has a very straight figure, so you can see it's not very much defined right here from the waist down to the hip, but hers is about 8 inches. I actually have a little faint dashed line that I drew there. At this point I need to make sure I have enough for her hips, so her full hip circumference divided by 4, draw for ease right there, leave at least 2 inches, so I want to leave half an inch. And then I also have to include the seam allowance. So the bodice already has seam allowance and this skirt already does have seam allowance. So if I take out 3/8 seam allowance from here on the side, and then from here to there, I'm going to have 1/4 of her hip plus half an inch for ease. Half an inch times 4 is going to be 2 inches of ease. So that's how I'm doing it. And then down, it'll just go down straight like that. It doesn't taper in, it doesn't go out like an A-line skirt, it just goes all the way straight down. And this is how the back's going to be. So here's the front bodice, and I've done the same. I have a skirt piece over here that I've pinned on, overlapping the seam lines here. This is going to be cut on the fold. This original dart that you see here is from the bodice. And then to go down into the waist area, I made a little shorter so it doesn't hit on the tummy area. Again, this is something that I perfect on the muslin, and then on the body I drape it. I make sure it's actually where it's supposed to be. Once I've done that, then I finalized my drawings right here. So this is a pattern I can use over and over again. But it took a while for me to know that this is where the darts had to be and how long they had to be. So I had mentioned that I had drawn a faint dashed line at the hip height right here. I'm just going to mark it in blue so you can really see what that is. So this is the vertical distance from the waist to the full hip there. That for my mom is 8 inches right here. So that's what we have there. So this is the fullest part of the hip. This is 1/4 of her hip plus the ease, which is half an inch, and then plus 3/8 seam allowance. And that's what I have there. That's what I drew on the paper to make sure the hips will fit, and then going all the way straight down. So this is the same process I would do for myself if I'd done this for myself. It's just that for me, the hip curve here would be more pronounced because I have a larger difference between my waist and my hip. So this is all very customizable to your shape to get the skirt to fit. And remember, it's just a very simple skirt. It's a straight skirt. There's nothing really hard about doing this. This is what's important, that you get this length correct so that you get the fullest part of the hip at the right height right there. And then about the darts, I'm going to show you a little bit about that when I show you the pattern pieces, but this is something that I try to ignore on the pattern. And when I'm doing my test garment, I like to drape those darts on the body. I think it's just the most accurate way to get a really nice fit. So you end up with your bust dart, your side seam sewn, everything, but then you have extra ease at the waist that you can just pin and drape to your body yourself, and I think that gives you a nice fit. For all of these versions, I'm using linen in different types of blends. Most of these blends are mostly linen. Some of them have a bit of rayon, some of them have a bit of cotton. And for the lining, I've used different types of fabrics, but the one that's my mom's favorite is rayon. It turns out really soft and nice on the inside. So let me show you quickly how I constructed this. It's about a 10-11 minute clip of sewing, how I put all the lining pieces together. It's a little bit different to an unlined dress. I know a lot of you have been asking for lining things, so here you go. Here's a lining video for you. For these modified lyric dresses that are sheath dresses, I only have 3 actual pattern pieces. It's really simple to sew in the end for the main pieces. So I have this front on the fold, I have a V neckline here. Over there I have the back, the center back, his interface partially right there on that area so that I could put in a zipper later on. Here are the short sleeve pieces, and I'm going to show you where the little darts are just so you can see them. This is the original dart from the lyric bodice, which I had perfected by sewing a few test garments, so that is that dart there. Now over here, the lyric bodice also had a waist dart. Over here we would have a seam and then would come an A-line skirt. Instead, I've already shown you how I modified the pieces, so this is just an extended dress, just one piece, a sheath dress. But that dart that was on the pattern, I just disregarded that one. And then with the first version I made for my mom, I actually pinned this dart on her body. By pinning it on her body, I can really determine where her waist height is, you know, from when you measure down. And that's the widest part of that dart. And then I went up here a few inches, 3 inches, went down 5 inches there and drew that by pinning that on and then perfecting it on the piece. So that is the front waist dart that's going to give her a little bit of shaping. This dress is supposed to be semi-fitted, not super tight, but this does give a little bit of shaping right there. Optional, of course. I think this waist dart on the front is always optional. And I'll show you the one on the back. Here you can see the center back is interfaced already, and here we have a waist dart over here. I think the darts on the back are not as optional. I think they do need to be there to give great shaping on the back. The widest part of this dart is her waist height, is the small of her back. And then this dart is longer than the one on the front. In the back we don't have a bust. That's why in the front the waist dart is usually smaller so it doesn't bump up onto the bust. So here we have a good 6 inches up and a good 6 inches down. And we end up in a point and in a point right there. So this was draped on her body and then finalized and perfected on the pattern piece, and now I have a pattern that works and I can make over and over again, and I always know that these darts are going to work on her. These are the lining pieces for the dress. I used the same pattern pieces and I only divided the top area to create a facing and then the rest of it. But then when I sew this together, it'll be the exact same shape and size as the main pieces. It's just that the facing pieces are interfaced right there. This is the front, the V is on the fold right there for that facing, and here we have 2 pieces because we're going to have a zipper in here. As usual, to interface these facings, I did block fusing and it's all ready to go. For the lining, I'm only going to sew the bust dart, that's going to be there, but then the darts that were in the waist, those are not going to be sewn in the lining. I'm just going to leave that loose in there. The lining should always be slightly larger, a little wider than your main pieces. As with any woven project where we have a neckline, we're going to stay stitched, super important, especially for linen. It tends to stretch out. I always start from the shoulder to the center. You're seeing me do the back. Repeat that on both sides. I do it within the seam allowance, so smaller than 3/8 for this pattern. And then for the center, it's a little different. I start from the shoulder and go into the center, stop, cut the thread, and then flip and do again from the shoulder to the center. It's better to keep it directional so that both end up looking symmetrical. Here I've already sewn a bust dart. You can see where the line of the dart was, but that I sewed it a little inwards, making a little concave shape, a little curved. It follows the shape of the rounded area of the bust on the side a little better. Especially for my mom, that really helps her, so that's how I sewed mine. Here you're seeing me sew one of the waist darts. You can see it's a fisheye dart. I have 4 of these to sew, both in the front and the back, but I've only filmed one for you. Easy to get these done at the beginning of the project. Now I'm taking my time to serge all the edges of the main pieces. I can do this now because that bust dart is sewn. If it wasn't sewn, I wouldn't be able to serge the sides. So I'm doing the sides, the center back, everything, even the shoulder areas, all of them serged, so I can just sew later and press all these seams open. Short little shoulder seams now, 3/8 of an inch. That's what I'm using for this whole pattern. The lyric uses 3/8 of an inch, so I'm keeping that as per the pattern. It's just that the shape of the dress changes a little below, but that stays the same. Now I'm sewing the center back seam. Now at the beginning, I'm sewing down up to a mark. That's where the zipper is going to go. So what you see me sewing now is a basting stitch, long stitch length with my sewing machine. Then after the mark, I reinforce and I sew all the way down with a normal stitch length. You can see there's an interfaced area there already. That's to give structure to the zipper right there. I have more details about sewing a centered zipper, so I didn't really film it in much detail here. I will leave the thumbnail for you to look at. Here you can see my zipper basted in. I'm doing the centered zipper insertion. I would not do it without hand basting this. Here you can see me sewing it partially with a zipper presser foot. Again, watch my detailed video about zipper insertions. Centered ones, it doesn't matter how long or short the zipper is, the technique is the same. Now I've put my main piece away, and what I'm sewing now is the bust dart for my lining pieces. This is the only dart I'm going to sew with the lining because I told you I wasn't going to do the waist darts on the lining. I'm just going to leave that loose inside. Just to reduce bulk, I'm going to serge away that big volume of the dart here for the lining. I'm not going to do that with the main dress. I'm just doing it with the lining just so there's less bulk in there. Here I'm at the ironing board pressing this center back seam open. Now the first part, you see some hand basting that I did there. Sort of similar to what I did with the main, only here I did it by hand. And from the zipper mark downwards, it's actually sewn normally. I am pressing the whole seam open so that the upper area where the zipper is going to be later ends up with a memory crease. So after I press the seam open, I'm going to remove that basting stitch there, and the upper area will be pressed in but open. What we have here is the back facing and the back lining. You can see they follow the same shape. Now we have to put these two pieces together. It's quite curved, so I'm going to take my time and pin this. The fact that I'm using 3/8 seam allowance makes it easier to manipulate when you have a curved seam like this. If it was 5/8, it would be much harder. So 3/8 is the sweet spot for the seam allowance here. Here are both back facings and lining pieces basted on ready. I would not do this without the hand basting. You know, if you want to sew a curved area with pins, it just makes it harder and it doesn't end up being so accurate. Here I'm sewing the back facing to the back lining pieces. Nice curved seam, much easier when done with the hand basting. This is how it looks. It looks super neat. I love how that looks. Now I'm just going to remove the basting stitches. The basting stitches take a minute to sew and then 2 seconds to remove, so it's not like you're adding a lot of time to your sewing. Then you repeat on the other side. Here is the front facing and the front lining. Now this one takes a little while longer to pin and to sew because it's a larger area with a bigger, more pronounced shape. I made little marks there so I can join them up in the center. Then I go ahead and pin the shoulders, and then I go pinning all the area in between nice and neatly. I use a lot of pins and then I hand baste. After taking my sweet time, it's hand basted very carefully, and now I'm very confident that this is going to turn out amazing. And now it's time to sew. Here we are sewing the facing to the lining. It's okay, you just have to go a little bit slower, especially at the bottom where the curve gets really nice and pronounced. The hand basting is key and it's going to ensure you get a really neat result there. 3/8 seam allowance. Now that I have the facings on, I'm serging these edges. You know, I don't want to leave raw things on the inside of the dress. I want the dress to last, so I'm taking my time to serge these curved areas. Now that I have the facing and the lining sewn on, the shoulder area is complete. The shoulder area is composed of the facing and the lining, so now I can serge these edges. After serging the shoulder areas, I'm going to serge the sides of the lining so that it's ready for when the side seams come later. Here on the table we have two copies of the dress. On the left you see the main, the pretty fabric that's got the zipper on. On the right side of the screen you have the lining and you have all that zipper area open, as you can see. The side seams are free, they're not sewn because it's easier to sew them later. Now on the table we have everything extended. This is the lining, it's right sides up. This is why we haven't sewn the side seams first. Then we put your main dress on top, both extended on top of each other, right sides together, and we're going to go ahead and align the neckline areas together. In that, you know I'm going to baste it. Now the neckline has been basted on. The facing and lining area go right to the edge of the zipper. You can see they're aligned right on top of each other. I'm also drawing a dot there at the V point to help me pivot nice and easily. And now I'm just going to take my time and sew this at 3/8 of an inch. As I go around, you see that my shoulder seams are open, both for the main and the lining. I think that's neater. I would never serge them and press them all to one side. I think that's bulky. And that's why I took the time to serge the edges first, so I could press these open afterwards. This is my preferred way of sewing woven fabrics. Now I'm going to trim the excess of the zipper, tape away so that it's nice and neat. I'm going to snip around the curves of the back neckline. When you go down the V, you don't need to snip that area. The only area you need to snip is actually the V point right there. Now, of course, we're going to understitch. This is always a step that we need to take when we have facings. Headed towards the facing right here, and we're sewing on the edge. Now when we get to the V, I'm not going to go through the V with understitching. I'm going to stop a little before the V, take away, cut the thread, and start again a little after the V. Here is the dress almost done hanging there. The side seams have been done at this point. That was the last step. I didn't film that for you because that's super boring. You can see that open area of the lining is open all the way down to the zipper. My mom does slip stitching by hand to sew the lining to the zipper. That's how I do it as well. It's my preferred method, so I did not film that. Now you can see the sleeve. The sleeve was sewn in on the round after sewing the side seam. It's very easy to set in the sleeve. Before serging, I lined up the raw edges of the lining because I don't use sleeves on the lining, so it's just the raw armhole you have there. I pin it all the way and then I serge all the layers together. When you turn it around, that's how the front neckline looks. The front facing on the inside, super neat. I'm very happy. I'm going to show you the 4 dresses in the order that I made them. So this is the first one that I made in, I think, September 2022. Here it is. It's a linen rayon blend, linen 55%, rayon 45%. Gorgeous. We bought these when we went to the fabric district in Sao Paulo when I went with my mom a couple of years ago. Here we just used really soft poly type lining. It's really soft. My mom can tolerate it. Facings. My mom always likes to slip stitch this down to the zipper. It's the most accurate and easiest way to do a lining. And my mom's really good at hand sewing, so she always does that when I make these types of things. The sleeve is not lined, it's just up to the armhole, and then that all gets serged together, and that's how the lining hangs onto the main garment, and the sleeves turn out less bulky that way. So that's really nice. And then we have the centered zipper insertion at the back. Hard to see with all these prints, but there are plenty of dots here giving a lot of shaping. Now the lining, I like to leave it about 1.5 inches shorter than the main here inside, so that when you walk you'll never see this lining. The lining always needs to be a little bit looser on the inside. Sometimes lining fabrics aren't that great and seams can start splitting as well. They're not as resistant as the main fabric that you're using, especially if you sit down or there's any stress in the seams. So that is the first one. Up to here, it's a lyric, but with a modification that this is cut on the forward and have a zipper on the back instead. And from there down comes a straight skirt. I think it looks amazing. It fits amazing. And then when I came here in January 2023, I made the next 2 versions. My mom wanted a classic black linen one. It's very simple, but it's very classic and very well fitting. I really like the soft V neckline. This one is 100% linen, so the quality of the fabric is amazing. And everything's the same, nice lining in there, all hand sewn. the darts, everything fits amazing. It's a little crumpled because it's black and it's really hard to show. She had a dress in the past that got really old and she had to part with it. So she was really missing a nice classic black dress. So this is it and it's beautiful. I'm really happy I was able to make it. Now the next two are the ones that have the most striking fabric. This next one is 100% linen. We also bought it in Sao Paulo in Brazil when we went last time. And it's really impactful. The colors are just really bold. My mum loves tones of green like this. It's like her favorite color. And this print was super interesting. I mean, you can see the print is just really interesting. Very large scale, gorgeous, gorgeous, very tropical, very Brazilian. And everything's the same, green lining inside. And it's just so gorgeous. Zipper on the back and the straight skirt down there. Very, very nice, well-fitting. And this was really fun to sew. I usually tend to enjoy projects that have a loud, fun fabric like this. It just brings me joy while I'm sewing them. It just makes me happy. And I can imagine how it's going to turn out. I can like see it. This is one of those dresses. And yeah, my mom had a great eye for this fabric. I know these types of fabrics are like, wow, loud. They're not for everyone, but we like them. This is the most recent one I made in the summer while I was here in January. All the sewing footage you saw me doing, that was all while I was here a couple of months ago. And this fabric is just amazing. Now, one thing, when we bought this fabric, I also bought it. We have so many of the same fabrics over the years. We've been twinning for years. Ever since I was a teenager, we would like a fabric and we would both get it and I'd make different garments out of it. And we've done that twinning thing a lot. So eventually you'll see me make something for myself in this fabric. It was a border print, super light tones up here with beige and some nice leaves and stuff. And then towards the bottom, the hem, look at this. It's so striking. The tones of pink are just amazing. So lovely. And these are linen cotton blend. So nice. Zipper right there. I love doing my zipper insertions, doing the center technique. This is how the thumbnail looks here. Go ahead and look at that one because it doesn't matter if you're doing it like that or like that. The way I do it is the same. The difference is just the length. And I will sew these in my sleep, you know, backwards without even looking. I really loathe the invisible zipper, not because of the technique, but because they don't last very long. They tend to get stuck. And just tell me how annoying it is to remove a zipper and replace it with a new one. It's the worst thing in the planet. So after a few years of sewing, I decided I don't do invisible zippers. I have a tutorial on them. I'll always do the centered one because they just last forever and they look just as neat. So that is my thing with the zippers. All of them have the same technique and it's easy peasy. a nice lyric collection of sheath dress hacks. These are my mom's favorite dresses. I know she feels her most best and confident when she wears them. I can see it in her face when she's out and about. Yeah, she feels amazing in these, and I'm just so happy I could sew these for her. Sewing for her is always the best thing. It's so nice, just as nice as sewing for myself. And it's extra special because we don't live close to each other and I can only sew when I'm with her. It's all the fitting and things. I can't really sew for her when I'm far away. So these are special for me, they're special for her, and I'm really, really happy I got to make them. Don't forget to check out the lyric. Today, Friday, it's only $5. It's always great value for you to grab it. If you don't, check out my playlist. So much content about the lyric. There's so much you can do with the pattern other than what is just there. There's so much. So that's all from me. I'll see you again very soon. Have an amazing weekend. Bye.